Welcome back to Shat on TV Taboo Edition, the unofficial podcast companion piece to the hit FX show Taboo. I'm one of your three hosts, Roger Roper, and alongside me are my two co-hosts, Gene Lyons.
I have sworn to do very foolish things.
And Big D, Dick Ebert.
Good evening.
And this is our Taboo Season 1, Episode 1 review. We just finished watching the show Taboo on FX here in the United States, BBC One and others. And this is our deep dive review show where we look back on Episode 1 and give our thoughts, reactions, analysis, feedback on the premiere episode of the show. Guys, I got to turn things over to you. This, for me, looks like an interesting show, but unlike Westworld, it didn't quite grab me right off the bat. Your thoughts?
Well, I have to tell you, I wasn't too excited when we had talked about doing this because I didn't know much about it and I didn't know what it was going to be. But about halfway into the episode, I found myself really enjoying it. I'm not so much into all the mystical, necessarily the mystery of the flashbacks he's having and the nightmares and talking to his father. I'm more interested in the historical aspect as well as it's a compelling whodunit. There's a great mystery. I think we have a lot of players we're going to have to unravel and try to solve the mystery. So for me, I enjoyed it for that.
If you're joining us for the first time and never heard us, we're covering Taboo and welcome. If you came with us from Westworld, where the audience was quite robust, and I hope you did follow us along to Taboo, welcome to my wheelhouse. Welcome to my nightmare. This is the show for me. For all the things that I thought Westworld had issues with as far as not being dark enough or injecting levity where I didn't want it or not having a consistent, brooding, overwhelming darkness. This show is delivering in spades. I'm super excited about this. And just like Big D mentioned, those supernatural, spooky, spiritual aspects of the show, I'm absolutely hooked. Super excited about this show. So it's going to be a little bit of a reversal. If you're used to us being, the other way around, me being the skeptic, I am 100% sold on Taboo.
Yeah, Gene, we're definitely going to have to lean on your expertise for this show because it is so dark. It is so brooding. It's like having a one-man periscope directly into your black savage heart. That's how I would describe the show. So for those of you who have never listened to any of our review shows for television, we do things a little bit differently. We don't do scene-by-scene recap. We assume that you, the audience, has gone back and watched, and you are now looking for a companion podcast to listen. So we hope that you stay with us throughout all 8 episodes. We love fan interaction. If you have thoughts on the show, email those to us. We're hosts at shatontv.com. You can also message us via Twitter or Instagram at ShatOnTV. And the topics for today, guys, I figured that we do this. We try and keep things to an hour because we respect your time as the audience. So the topics that we've got listed here, guys, that I want to talk about in the our premiere episode of Taboo is, the first one, of course, what kind of show is this? What did the director, what did the writers set the tone as? What did Tom Hardy, the creators, what have they fashioned this show to be? What can we expect after watching the initial 60 minutes? Who are the key characters? We'll lay those out, the ones that we know of and the ones that are probably going to come up in future episodes. What do we know about James Delaney, the character played by Tom Hardy? We're going to dive into his, because the again, being the first episode of the series, I don't think there was a scene without Tom Hardy or very little scenes without Tom Hardy. So we want to dive into his character. Then the geography and history of this. Obviously, it's set in 1814, which is a tumultuous time. It's the time of the War of 1812 between the British Empire, which was one of the strongest empires in the world, and a new little country that had just broken off on its own, the United States of America. So we've got that going on. And then the visual elements played a strong component of the show. So we'll talk about that. But those are the big buckets. Guys, I'm going to have to ask, what did you think of the first series? What kind of show can we expect to see over the next 7 to 8 weeks?
So I think, as Big D has pointed out, as far as this show being a whodunit, I think that the core of this show, much like Westworld was at its core a sci-fi show, even though it was in a Western environment. This is a period piece, but it is definitely a classic murder mystery. It's a whodunit. And you can tell that by, if you look at the key elements of what a murder mystery is. I'm turning to Ginny Weihart, who wrote in the on thebalance.com. Plot is everything. I think in this episode, they did a really good job of laying out exactly what the plot was. Introducing both the detective and the culprit early on. I think our protagonist here, James Keziah Delaney, played by Tom Hardy, is certainly the detective. He's made no mystery of the fact that he himself is going to try to solve what's going on here. He wants revenge. He wants retribution. And I think that the culprit, I have a hunch that we've already seen that person somewhere in the first episode. I think that with a classic murder mystery, that you always introduce them early on. It wouldn't make sense for them to come on, later on in the show. So it does leave several characters we'll get to later who it could be. Also introducing the crime, the death of James's father, and also the pressures for this island that the family owns. A sufficiently violent crime, in this case, a murder, a believable crime. Again, we're going with poisoning, which is believable in this day and age. And, going further and further, a culprit capable of committing the crime, giving all the facts. This is something that we didn't see in Westworld was basically laying all the facts out and having it make sense. I think this is going to be a much more logical show where the pieces of the theory are going to be put together very, very sequentially, and I really look forward to that.
So you say it's a murder mystery because we're introduced to the character of James Delaney. We also learned that his father may have been poisoned, but is it only a murder mystery set in 1814?
Right. I think there are definitely elements beyond murder mystery. I mean, a murder mystery could be very straightforward, like, tales from the 30s, classic detective comics. This is there are elements of the supernatural. There are elements of horror to this too. In a good horror story, again, you've got elements where you're trying to instill fear, what this show puts on, early. And also, elements of surprise, suspense, like all those things that kind of go along with a murder mystery. But in addition, we've got haunting flashbacks. We've got talk of the supernatural. Everything is draped in dark colors, making use of London as a backdrop. And again, the heavy use of black, foreboding tones, the score, everything is telling you that this is a horror story, much in the vein of several pieces put together by Edgar Allan Poe. Of course, Poe came later than this is set, but I think the show is taking cues from Poe as far as that mix of mystery, horror story, the supernatural. If you go back and read stuff like Telltale Heart or Cask of Amontillado, for the literary fans out there, also The Fall of the House of Usher. This story, actually, with that gradual sickness and the crumbling of a family name, is almost a direct take on the Fall of the House of Usher. Those who are literary fans out there who have written us before, please give me your take on that. I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
Okay, so from a supernatural perspective, the only thing that we've seen thus far that would allude or give us clues that this might be a supernatural is like you said, there were a couple of scenes him flashing back, and one could infer that we're just learning about his past. But then there's a scene where he's in the morgue, and he seems to be talking in tongues to the bodies. But then one of them gets up almost like in a zombie-like state, and he's face to face with that. Is that from his past? Because he was there's elements of slave ownership in this show. Was the body that he was face to face with someone from his past? Or are we supposed to believe that some of his supernatural power that he learned while he was in Africa?
No, from the conversation, well, we know it's not real, because once the vision ends, that we see that one gurney is empty that the slave had gotten up from. And first off, that's a big dude. That slave was a giant man. He is the only character we've seen who actually dwarfs James and makes him look human. But I think there is some relationship between those two characters, and whether James is racked with guilt for what happened. And James seems to know that there's going to be a day of atonement coming very soon, but it is not now. So all of the visions he's having are simply memories. The only mystical component is the conversations that James has knowledge of things that were going on in London without having a conversation with his father. Now, that can easily be written off as the father was actually lucid and communicating with his son the whole time. But if they didn't have any contact, that conversation by the fire that James said he was hearing all these secrets and knowing, that's the only supernatural component I can't explain away.
So, gentlemen, what we have so far is we've got a very dark, scary at times. We saw some blood being cut open. So we know there's a dark, scary horror type element to the show so far. There's a mystery that we're supposed to solve, which is the big one, the death of the family. There's a power struggle between the internal workings of the family of who's going to have control over the Delaney shipping company. And then there's also some outsider forces also wanting to take the family business, right? So you have the East India Trading Company, you have the internal Delaney family, and then you have kind of a whodunit from a murder situation. And possibly even some supernatural powers that Delaney has learned when he was in his time in Africa. Possibly.
Let's not forget, we have some possible international diplomacy that's not just dealing with the family, but dealing with patriotism and being a loyal member of the crown, a servant of the crown. So Let's not forget that.
Okay.
One of the things that's really interesting about that is most of these hit shows that we've been watching, lately, whether it be, Stranger Things or the OA or Game of Thrones or even Westworld, we had a universe that was set up where all the rules were just kind of out the window, right? Especially with Westworld and Game of Thrones, you've got a totally new universe, right? That you can, where things can be completely different and you have no idea what the rules are. It's very interesting to see a show that, whether it will be hamstrung or really take advantage of the fact, and I think so far in episode 1, we see them take advantage of the fact that you can just give us a name, you could give us the name of a place, Antigua, or you could give us the name of a company, the East India Company, and we can then go outside of this show and fill in the context around it. And that's a really powerful tool that I hope they seem to have used really well. I was fascinated just doing the research, as Big D mentioned, the times and places that where you can get so much information outside of what's shown on the screen, because they've only got 10 episodes to show you everything.
Well, no, I think there's only going to be 8 episodes.
They've only got 8 episodes to show you everything.
Yeah. So Tom Hardy is quoted as saying, "It's not a period drama until someone gets naked and cover themselves in blood. You can't have naughtiness like Game of Thrones on the BBC or FX, however. There's conspiracy, murder portrayal, along with a dark family mystery in this combustible tale of love and treachery." So the first character outside of James Delaney that I want to talk about is Thoit. Thoit is a lawyer that seems to be representing the interests of the East India Trading Company. I didn't get the feeling that he necessarily was a Delaney family representative. Did you get that?
Yeah, he was the lawyer for the senior Delaney.
Okay, so was he friend or foe?
Well, Gene and I had this conversation where Gene feels that he could possibly, everything that he was doing was making him actually a loyal advocate for the senior Delaney, Horace, by presenting the offers and actually, being aware of the danger to anyone who owns this poison pill of a piece of land. Was he simply representing Horace by providing those offers? And I don't think he is. I went back and watched it again. To me, what gives away whether this is a friend of James or a foe, the first encounter they have in the outside urinal, which is conveniently adjacent to the stew that they're cooking for the restaurant, he talks down the value of this piece of land. If he was a true loyal advocate to the father, he would have had his intentions in mind, which was this land is valuable and should go to my son. So by him simply hiding the fact of the value of the land and trying immediately to facilitate a transfer tells me that he is no friend of the Delaney family.
Now, Big D, I can see it going either way. As we talked about before, the first time we see Thoit, he shows up and he goes to Zilpha, which is Horace Delaney's daughter, and he says to her, were you sure to pay the extra shilling to have him buried extra deep, because of resurrectionists and you don't want, basically grave robbers coming in and messing with the body. And that could be taken two ways. One way is that he has respect for the man. He wants him to be buried properly. The other way is that he has some hand in his death, in his untimely death, and therefore wants the body to be buried so deeply that it's, that it's never examined. You can see it going both ways. Same with him saying the value of the property. He's not necessarily trying to screw James out of the money, but rather trying to tell him, like, it's not something worth messing with. It's not, relieve yourself of this burden. It's just some rocks. Just take the money and shut up, basically. And again, I could see him seeing, if he's been around for these years and watched what the pressures have done to Horace and the threats that have been made against him and all that, maybe he just wants to spare James that same fate, and is trying to do the right thing. But maybe not.
Later on, we learn that James is not coming into the situation blind. He's done his research. He knows the key players. He knows what's been going on. He even knows that the U.S. and Great Britain is negotiating a secret treaty. It would be smart for him to come back and play like he is, a bit ignorant in the beginning to the facts, and see how people come to him and present themselves. If people don't know you know the truth, they will just lie, and it would give him a good idea of who's on his side.
Let me ask you guys this, just strictly from a storytelling standpoint. Do you like the fact that here's a guy who's been away for 10 years, presumably dead, but then automatically comes back, buries something out on the beach, but then knows the answers to everything that's been going on? Like, is it a little bit too Superman-y? That's my problem with Superman. A lot of people have problems with Superman. Is like, here's a guy that seemingly has zero weaknesses, right? Except for Krypton. So you look at the character James Delaney, he knows everything. There's nothing he has to learn from any of the characters that we were introduced in episode 1. He seems to know it all. And he's just, playing dumb to see which alliances he's going to form.
Well, I think the key thing to consider, Raj, is that you don't know where he's been for 10 years. The claim is that he's been in Africa, but you don't know if he could have been spending these years doing research, checking the scheme out, especially if he's tipped off by his father and be well aware of what plan he needs to execute. In addition, we're not seeing what he's doing all the time. As you said, he's in a lot of the scenes, but the scenes aren't stacked back to back. There is time in between where he could have contacts. He could have, methods of figuring things out.
And we're also just, putting it in faith that he was in Africa. We don't know where he has been and what he is doing. If he had actually gone to the piece of land, he has knowledge of a family history there. I wouldn't be surprised if he possibly could have visited there and learned more about what was going on by actually getting his boots on the ground. But they lay the groundwork for me that makes all of his knowledge explainable, is the years that he spent as a cadet. With the East India, was it the East India Corporation? Was it their cadet academy?
Yeah, it was part of their the company army, right? So the East India Trading Company had its own private force during the peak of the company.
So we know in the 2 years he excelled in everything that a soldier should do. So for me to believe that he had actually done the research, he's very intelligent, he's very capable, he has the skills needed. It's all plausible of that he could know all this.
In addition, Raj, I think that we will see some weaknesses. There's no way this can be an interesting character. Like you said with your criticism of Superman, there's no way they could be an interesting character unless he has some weaknesses. And I think we're seeing little hints of that, in that those little tinges of madness. Something is haunting him, and there's something dark in his past. What's particularly interesting about James as well as Big D says, we don't know where he's been, but we know he's been a lot of places, and the things that he has learned and the contacts he could have made. But also, much like, again, not to get too literary here, but in Wuthering Heights, Heathcliff is gone for several years. He comes back, he's very well-to-do. They don't really tell you what he does, but it's not good. And he says, when he comes back and he speaks to Zilpha, his sister, this is when James Keziah Delaney comes back and speaks to his sister, he says that he did very well in Africa. So, he's got money, and he does. It's not even, and that kind of speaks to also the fact of, does he even need this fortune or this empire from his father? He may not.
No, and Thorne, her husband, actually makes that point. When he's boasting a bit that his time in Africa was very fruitful, that he's good with the money, he's like, well, why do you need to then burden yourself with a legacy? He also offers not only just saying that he's wealthy, but to take care of his sister. So now, are we talking actually here about Zilpha? Are we okay to transition into her?
Yeah, so these are the characters that I want to introduce, and we can talk about Zilpha and Thorne together, because Zilpha is the sister of James Delaney. We learned that it's a half-sister. And she's married to D-bag number 1 of the most fruitful of flavors, Thorne. always going to be a thorn in James Delaney's side, I guess. But this is the one character that I was like, really? Like, are you going to be this, like, there was a lot of monologuing with Thorn, and this is, I think, going to be my criticism of the show, is that how this guy's going to come right off the bat and, like, I don't have to know the man to hate him. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there was a little, like, over-the-top monologue-y situation where, like, okay, you're beating us over the head that we're not going to like their character, Thorn.
Okay, much like when we were talking about Westworld, we talked about the Ford Westerns and how much that influenced how classic Westworld was in that sense, that it had those nods to those Western movies. These are huge nods to the works by Bronte. Like this character is in like every Bronte book, right? And so it's a perfect foil if if you've got for every Heathcliff, there's got to be a Mr. Darcy, right? Like this is basically. Thorne is a classic English gentleman asshole, and I think that he's really well played. Again, there is some depth to him, though, that, like, make no mistake, when he wants, his initial thing is that he wants James out of the picture, just gone. But he also, the second notion would be death, because he considers him something unnatural. He's an affront to what it is to be English, essentially.
So for those who don't know Charlotte Bronte or weren't afforded a liberal arts college, if you've ever seen the movie Titanic, what we're saying is Thorne is essentially Billy Zane. He is the Billy Zane character in Titanic who doesn't like Jack and is married to not Renee Zellweger. God, who's the lead?
Oh, it's Kate Winslet.
Kate Winslet. Yeah, exactly. That's who this guy is, right? He's just the bad guy that's married to potentially the love interest of the main character, because there seem to be a little Game of Thrones incestual comments that happen between Zilpha. It's Zilpha with a P. Zilpha and James, where he's like, even though I was away for 10 years, I never stopped loving you.
Yeah, and I want to say I didn't get Thorne. Obviously, he's playing the role of the English gentleman, but I think that's a front. The vibe I get from him is he is a more middle of the road. He has aspirations for something higher. I would not be surprised if it turns out that he is not nearly as wealthy, as affluent, or from a fine upstanding English family as we're led to believe. And that, if you're willing to push your way, up the ladder, we talked about stratification in Westworld. I don't think he's one to be trifled with. I don't think he's this meek English gentleman. I think he's a wolf in sheep's clothing. He's someone who, he's already said, will do what it takes.
Yeah, but did you feel that Zilpha and Thorne, do you think their love was endless, or do you feel that Zilpha may have had different feelings? Like, you don't think that she actually really loves Thorne, do you?
I think the traditional love that we all enjoy right now is a luxury that certain time periods of the world didn't have. A lot of times you had to marry for survival, for family. I don't know necessarily that this was a romantic love, but she seems a bit loyal.
Zilpha also, interestingly enough, she's a rather cold character, possibly the coldest or the second coldest character in the story, in the sense that, she challenges Thorne into the courage of his convictions, like whether he is actually willing to kill if he talks about killing. But also, she says, when they talk about how deep they buried her father just to a normal depth, she says he was buried to the depth of my love. Like, essentially, like she's saying essentially that she's cold, man.
She only said that because the last few years he was an embarrassment to her. So we don't know the backstory there. There could have been some falling out or some public display that could have damaged her and Thorne's attempted ascension through, the British. It's not, what would we call it?
It's a class. It's the British aristocracy.
Yes, exactly. So I think also when you're come from a family of madmen, and they mention later on that madness is passed through the umbilical cord. If you have a raving lunatic in the family, then people aren't going to invite you to their parties.
So what is this, House Targaryen?
Possibly.
So, Big D, do we classify then, and Raj, this question's open to you too, if you care to be interested in the show. So Zilpha, do we see her as though there's a hardness to her, but then there's also this vulnerability where she seems genuinely afraid of Thorne? And so is she a woman afraid, or is she a woman made of steel?
She pushed him and was unsure how he would react. When he leaves the room, you can see that she's visibly shaken. She expected retribution. And when she didn't get it, I think she learned something. But she was expecting it to go badly. I want to just backtrack a little to Raj's comment about the incest vibe. I definitely got the incest vibe. And I'm trying not to, because the title of the show is Taboo. So I find myself looking, ooh, what's taboo? We got some incest, we got slavery. I don't want to do that. But Zulfa seems keen to have James keep the secrets of the past secret. And that could very well be incest.
Also, she makes note, again, when talking to Thorne, that she makes sure that he is keenly aware that is her half-brother. Not her brother, her half-brother. And I think that's another cue that there might be some sort of a romance between the two.
Okay, so we've talked about Zulfa, we talked about Thorne. Talking about Horace. Now, the father, we don't see the father alive. We don't see the father alive in any kind of flashbacks. All that we see is the father dead. We see him cut up and used in a physician test, an autopsy, to figure out whether or not he was poisoned. And it did find traces of arsenic that were delivered at heavy doses, especially over the last couple of years. So so the character of Horace, it appears to be, from what we know, outwardly, he seemed to be a man of great stature. As the funeral processions are going, the caller out in front is going, this is a man of great stature and great abilities and yada, yada, yada. So he seems to have a good public face up until the end, where he was labeled a madman, possibly because of the arsenic poisoning. But he also seemed a man that had demons, because he had multiple wives. He seemed to maybe have owned slaves and even married one, or at least impregnated one, that turned out to be James's mother, and possibly had issues with a hidden son. Or do we think that son that we see James pay off, the caretaker, is that possibly James's son? So just talking about the Horace family and the Horace lineage and the Horace father, what are your thoughts on him?
Well, I would not blame the madness on the arsenic, because the physician says that it would have affected his mind towards the end. So whatever was going on with Horace was either natural, or I had mentioned with Gene that I thought, if Horace for years is feeling pressure to sell this piece of land, to have people come and try to take it, and he's waiting for his son to return, the prodigal son, James. He faking some form of mental defect or being aloof would be a great way to stall for time. So other than talking to the fire and Brace's stories of his madness, we don't have any true intimate stories of his madness. It could very well be an act, or it could have been something hereditary, like they said. It could be passed through the umbilical cord.
All right, so a couple of the other characters that I wanted to point out that made an impression to me. Brace is the family caretaker, or family butler, almost the, knowing that Tom Hardy was part of the Dark Knight trilogy, I can't help but making comparisons to the butler character of Alfred in this, where, Batman returns and Alfred's there and he's talking about what's happened over, to the estate over the last couple of years. That's what I got out of Brace. He seems to be a likable character, maybe on the side of Delaney. Your thoughts?
I think Gene's going to have a lot to say about this, but Brace, to me, immediately red flags went up when James returns home and the first words out of his mouth is, "Brace, you are the captain of the mutineers." And he comes out to him in an open way. They even have a discussion about poison. This is before the autopsy's even been done. James already has intimate knowledge of what's been going on, and he speaks with Brace about private discussions that he'd had with his father to kind of throw him off. I do not think Brace is the loyal servant that we're led to believe right now, and I think he is a key player in the conspiracy to bring down the entire Delaney family.
Raj, I definitely picked up the Alfred Batman vibe. I mean, with the relationship there, right? So Bruce Wayne, he's parentless. The only person he really truly trusts is Alfred. And James comes in and says the same thing to, Brace. You're the only one I trust. Which again, I agree with Big D. I don't know if that's exactly the case. If he's really being honest about it. There are shows on both sides where they're basically signaling to each other. There's a lot of subtext in the show, which I really love. Brace is saying, I broke my leg, basically trying to entertain you, acting like a gorilla. And, and then on the flip side, James is saying you're the only one I trust, and but I know that you drink the Delaney Company brandy, and that there's a lot of subtext there going back and forth where there is something going on with him. Again, I'm not willing to, if we're playing Clue right now, like I'm still holding all the cards, but I'm not sure.
For 8 years, he had been in charge of the family offices by the dock. Prime real estate. You don't go down and check the locked offices for 8 years when James goes down and finds that it's actually running an operating brothel.
So you think Brace is in cahoots with Helga, the madam of the brothel?
It's one of two things. Brace is either incompetent or he has been making money off the family in other ways.
Yeah, there's probably some of that going on, but I don't see Brace as a bad guy yet. And I think it would be, you talk about those, what tropes of a good horror or a good murder mystery is always a twist, or they lead you down the path of thinking the suspect is one and they pull a spoiler, an M. Night Shyamalan on you. So hopefully there won't be too many twister turns here, but you need at least one character that's going to be on the side of the protagonist, right? And I think we're learning who that might be. But we talked about Helga, who is the madam of the brothel that is set up in the family shops. What we know of her so far through dialogue and exposition is that this is a woman who is seen near the docks. She seems to be someone of at least a little bit of stature in the underbelly of the area. Maybe she runs the dock. She's been running that prostitution ring for quite some time. I mean, even James says, I laid with you when I was a young boy. And she seems to have a pretty good business there, because not only is she, I think, making more money than just 10 pounds a day, but she has a lot of money to pay men to make sure that she keeps a hold of her business, as she threatens James with 12 men visiting her. And James turns around and says what I think is the best line in the first episode, which is, please do not misunderstand the situation. You send me 12 men. I will send you 12 sets of testicles in a bag, and then we can watch your little horde devour them together. I mean, this is the kind of, lines I think we can look forward to over the next 8 weeks.
We've learned all the way back in history that powerful men have always enjoyed using their power for sex. Whether it's Game of Thrones or whether it's just through history, that men have a habit of talking after they are having relationships. Whether it's even to today with Heidi Fleiss and the powerful clientele she had. If anyone has a good finger on the pulse of what's going on, Helga would know all the dirty little secrets of what's going on in London.
Yeah, but he immediately clears out Helga. He's like, get your operation, get your shit out. I don't care what you're going to pay me, whether you're going to pay me in money, you're going to pay me in men, you're going to pay me in women, you're going to pay me in kids. I don't want what your business is. So I don't think he's going to turn to Helga necessarily as a trusted advisor if he's kicking her out within 2 hours.
No, that's not what I'm saying. But Helga would be someone who has the pulse of the underbelly of London. So I'm saying that she already has, she's already threatened him openly to have him killed.
Yeah.
So let's not just look at her like a madam, because madams are rarely just that.
Exactly. As we've just learned from Westworld. The last character that I want to talk about that's great, and we've seen him in Game of Thrones, is Sir Strange. He's the chairman of the entire East India Trading Company. He's played by Jonathan Pryce, and he has a raging temper and appears to be quite possibly the principal villain, because there's the connection of him as the chairman of the East India Trading Company, but he was also the commander of James when James was part of the company when he was a child.
Yeah, I definitely get the vibe that these guys have a history, and they keep, Sir Strange says, basically that he, doesn't recall having James around. I think a student that's that ornery, that's that exemplary, I think would be somebody you'd remember. And also I think that, it goes the other way. Now, James clearly remembers him. So there is a history there, and I think that'll be interesting to watch develop. But again, he's set up as the classic villain, right? He's supposed to be the big bad guy. I don't buy that he is behind everything. I think that there's something much more nefarious going on.
Yeah, but James wasn't not. He showed exemplary marks early on, but later on in his career, he was strangling. He was breaking the necks of officers. He was going AWOL. He went pretty bad. Like he was not doing good stuff. We don't know if I assume he was expelled, right, out of the company.
Well, what's interesting is looking back at what they called the seminary and then later the academy. This was a very common thing, actually, was that these cadets were renowned for being out of control. Like this was just a thing that happened, and I've done some research on it. We can post to actually that's a really good idea. We'll post it on shatontv.com. Just kind of some of the things that they would engage in, that they would go into nearby towns and get into brawls, and they would, set things on fire. And so it's not uncommon for his ilk to be that out of control. Did you guys take the neck breaking literally? I thought that was just slang.
Oh yeah. No, I took that literally. I thought he probably killed a couple officers that crossed him the wrong way.
No, I think they were talking about things that were legend or things that were fact. I think that was more in the legend component of it. But James was an exemplary soldier for 2 years. Then all of a sudden he changes. Something caused that change. And I think it was a loss of faith or belief or disappointment. He has a clear respect for his commander. He definitely believes that, Sir Strange was someone to look up to. And the conversation where they're both pretending, where Sir Strange pretends he doesn't remember him, and whether it's the old age or the brandy, James mentions those who look up to others often remember them more than others who look down upon them. There was some form of he was an idol, it looks like, for James, someone he looked up to. And when he learned the true facts behind what he was doing, and he says, I know the evil you do because I was once part of it. Something caused him to break. This was not a gradual, slow change.
Well, he definitely has some distaste or some distrust when it comes to the East India Trading Company and Sir Stuart Strange. When they're in that meeting, he refuses to take a drink from them. While prior, when he was discussing with Brace, he did accept a drink. Now, if we know poisoning is part of the story, we know that the father was poisoned over some period of time. As the audience, I took that as a clue as I'm going to accept a drink from someone I trust versus someone I don't trust. So,
no, the only difference in that was, what did he make Brace go get?
Brandy. He made him go get the brandy.
2 glasses.
Aha! 2 glasses of brandy.
Now, if Brace has a problem coming back with 2 glasses, I'll bet you Brace came back with the good brandy that time.
Oh, I like what you're saying. So talking about the character of James Delaney, guys, he's certainly a hulking presence. He's dressed in black. He is, in fact, if we were still doing Westworld, I would put him on the list of characters who Teddy would grow into as James Delaney. He speaks in tongues, grunts. This is a show that you have to turn on the captions in order to fully get the 100% gist of what this character is saying. He doesn't seem to believe in God. He seems to be either doesn't believe in it, or he's seen too much of what man does to believe that there's good in people. He seems to believe in duty, but has problems with authority. I don't know, what other characteristics did you pick away from the introduction of James Delaney?
Well, he certainly seems to be unafraid of both the living and the dead. I mean, he speaks very frankly to spirits that he sees, but he also speaks very frankly, in person, that he's not easily shaken. I did gather that, one of the interesting things is you see how he reacts to the situation with his illegitimate brother, right? So, we're told that Horace has an illegitimate son, and that he goes, and he makes the payment on his care. He cares about what happens to this boy. He wants to, make sure that he's well taken care of, which he has been. I mean, if you consider pitching hay at a farm being well taken care of, but he's also not tender toward him in the sense that he doesn't want to go meet him and hug him and all that stuff.
Well, you see, I thought about that today, Gene. You took his not wanting to see his half-brother or to come see him again as that he was actually just doing his family duty and didn't have any feelings. I took it another way, that James is worried about his half-brother being used as leverage. And whatever's happened, if he shows that he has a love or a caring for his half-brother, the East India can use it. Anyone can use him to leverage James eventually to get to do what they want.
So you're going Russell Crowe and Gladiator. You don't want to make friends because you might have to,
Exactly.
He also does prompt payment that way too, right? Like you want to immediately pay off all of your debts because that guy who's been the caretaker, if he hasn't been paid off, he could go to the East India Trading Company and get some payment there.
Here's the other thing. He tells him originally that he's going to make payment. Give me your address. I'll make it payment in a banknote. He takes the extra step to get the cash and to surprise the farmer at his house. He wanted to see how the brother was being treated, whether the brother was alive, what was going on. If he truly didn't care and was just doing his family business, taking care of a family member doing what was right, keeping his father's word, he would have just sent the money. He went for a reason.
Well, I think he's also making sure that the guy's fucking telling the truth, right? Is the kid even alive?
That's exactly.
That's what it just said.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree, yeah. So, I mean, I think that's the main reason.
Now, getting back to who James is, I think one of my favorite scenes in this episode 1 is when they're going over his, the legend of James Keziah Delaney, and they talk about the ship burning, the ship sinking, the bear wrestling in there. I mean, this guy is a living legend, and I think that we can attribute a lot of these superhuman things to him, but obviously it's not all true. We know that he's traveled the world again, that he's been to Africa, he's been to the West Indies, so he's been around. But I am curious, as you mentioned before, Roger, as you alluded to, how far his powers actually go. And one of the things that we were left wondering after episode 1 is, how did he know to show up? I mean, this is the Victorian era. You don't have phone calls, you don't have the internet. How do you know that your father's dead and to get there? Because you can't store a body for that long. The body looks pretty fresh to me.
Yeah, but not only that his father's dead, he knows a lot more of what's going on. So he's had some form of correspondence with someone. It's not just the fact that his father's dead. He comes back and knows key players. He knows what's going on. He knows the land, the value of it. He knows what the intentions of the nations are, the East India is. But I think, let's look today. I always talk to my friends who don't travel much, and they generally have a smaller view, a narrow view of the world, of what the world is. And we live in a world where for $150, you can jump on a plane and fly to another country. Imagine in the 1800s. Everyone saw probably within 20 miles of their hometown. Their view of the world was very limited. For James to break out of that and to go see the rest of the world must have been extremely empowering. And he carries that back to London almost like a shield, and realizes how London thinks it's the center of Europe and it's really small and the people are simple and he sees through them. And his experiences are the only thing that could have given that to him.
Yeah, so you talk about the geography of this world and the history. We learned a lot about trade treaties and what land was like. You did some research on these areas, Gene, correct?
Yeah, so what I wanted to know is really how far you went. And so they named a few ports, and so I went through and kind of mapped them out to see where they were. And a lot of this is again, it fits the time. One port that they mentioned is Cabinda, and that's an African port that was involved in the slave trade. That kind of matches up again with James's history of being involved with ships that involve slaves. Antigua, on the other hand, is in the West Indies, and that's an island that's key to sugar and the slave trade as well. But that's on the opposite side of the Atlantic, right? That's in the West Indies. So we know that he's kind of been around there. What's interesting is this is very specifically set in a time period where slavery is just on the verge of full eradication in the English Empire, but it is already the wheels have already started moving as far as abolition of slavery goes. And so it kind of gives you some questions as to how legitimate what he was doing or involved with even was. And then kind of going further is, it brings up the issue of Nootka Sound. So there's reference to that, which is on the opposite side of America. So we know now that that Nootka Sound is on the West Coast. So it's kind of the breadth of this story is now spanning multiple continents.
Yeah, you said Cabinda's on the western side of Africa, right? It's in the Democratic Republic of Congo today.
Right.
That's where it would be. Antigua, as we know, was a Western Indies island right there in the Caribbean that was integral to the slave trade and to the spices. But this Nootka Sound, like you said, it's on the west side. I mean, in order to travel, you had to go around, Cape. Is it the Cape?
Cape of Good Hope.
Cape of Good Hope, that's down by Argentina, right? There was no Panama Canal back then. You had to go around the world if you wanted to do all this, right? So are we to believe that he's only been in the seas, or do you think that he went across the mainland of the United States?
I mean, it's hard to say. Anything's possible. He's still a fairly young man, but many years have passed. The interesting thing about Nootka Sound is that, again, with the timing of this, so this was a Spanish trade route until about 1789, where they had what was called the Nootka Crisis, right? And then the British used naval power to basically take over this route and basically push the Spain out through sheer force. So they have a lot invested in this geography. Again, this is what makes it really interesting as a show, is that just by the name of it and the year, we know exactly what's going on in the background there. Spain has a waning navy, and so they turn to France. France can't help them out, and the British basically take control of this area, only to then be faced in the War of 1812 with losing it, once again. And now you've got this guy who's got a private claim to it. So great.
Right. And the War of 1812 took mostly in Ontario and parts of Quebec, right? That was where most of the War of 1812 transpired. Most people don't realize that the entire line, the treaty that was eventually signed at the end, that finally designated the Kingdom of Canada, or the province of Canada, that would fall under the crown rule of the British Empire and America. That came as a result of that peace treaty, which involved the Nootka Sound territory in Vancouver and all that right there. But what a lot of people don't understand is just the power that the East India Trading Company had. I mean, it was essentially de facto ruler and it governed the entire country of India back at the time, as well as many other territories.
Right. The East India Company, interestingly enough, is not just in India, which a lot of people from the name assume. The main money from the East India Company and the main land that it was controlling was much more in Asia than just specifically, South Asia and India. But like you said, Raj, until 1857, the East India Company ran its own army, and they had basically what was called presidency armies. So there were 3 presidencies that they broke up the territory into, and each of those had an army, and they used that to push influence into all sorts of parts of Asia, into Afghanistan, and eventually actually started using Indian soldiers. Not just at first it was just Europeans, but then it started to be Indian soldiers. And in 1857, then England took over those armies, and they just merged it into a basically united Indian army. So we're told that James Keziah Delaney, Tom Hardy's character, was in the academy, and so I did some digging into that. Where did they get these guys? Where did they get these soldiers? And so from what I learned is that the cadets would go into what was at first called the seminary at about age 13 to 16 or so. So they would stay for about 4 years, so almost like college. And this was a lot like college. It was basically your parents would actually pay a tuition, but the majority of that cost of your education was done by the East India Company. And then you would get your education generally in artillery or engineering. Those were like the 2 big fields, and then later they added on infantry. But so a lot of these things that we're talking about that James was educated on, that's factually accurate, that he basically would have gotten a working knowledge of a lot of advanced technology and education relative to the general population.
For someone who didn't know necessarily, I wasn't well versed in the history of the East India. The relationship between the Crown and the East India is, I think, the most clearly displayed when James goes to meet Sir Strange and then the rest of the East India cronies who are going to make an offer to buy the piece of land. And it devolves quickly to threats. But what insults the East India the most isn't James's thoughts of selling the land, or it's the thought that he could possibly do something with the Americans. When he mentions the Americans' interest in the land, the tone changes, and they start to question his loyalty to the crown. There was no differentiation between the East India and the actual monarchy. So that symbiotic relationship between the two, I couldn't see any difference.
Essentially, East India Trading Company would be the equivalent of like a giant American corporation, multinational corporation, we'll say GE or ExxonMobil or Halliburton, having its own frickin'... So basically it's Halliburton is what you're saying, like has its own security company that's, securing forces for its own interest on behalf of the crown or on behalf of... That's what you should make the equivalence in modern times to like what's happening now, only much greater. Like they had much more power and influence.
Well, what's interesting about it is that is you have to understand the British were late to the game too, right? So we're gonna get really into some history here, guys. So feel free to, if you're a history buff, hang out with us. It was said that I believe the Portuguese would sail into the sun and the Spanish would sail into the sunset, right? They would go in either direction, and they were the ones opening up the trade routes. They understood that commerce was important. The English got to the point, and I learned this from the Honorable Company. Thanks to everyone who's reading it with me. But it's a great book that I've been digging into to get this, kind of some facts here. Was that the British, they didn't get there early. They didn't have the Navy to go explore, and they got in there late, but they had military might. And so their Navy basically said, the Queen essentially said that it was divine law, essentially, that trade was important. So not production, not shipping, but actual trade, exchange was, and they saw this as like a divine duty almost, was that they were going to take the riches of nature from certain parts of the world and bring them to other parts of the world, and that they were that countries that had much would give to countries that had little, and that was kind of the idea, was that it was their duty. But it was, to me, as I see it, a mask for the fact that they got there late, so they were going to use muscle to make up for being late.
Yep. And there was also another. People also forget that there was also a Dutch India Trading Company as well. Like and the Dutch India Trading Company was extremely powerful, extremely successful, and did it almost better.
Well, let's not forget, production and trade isn't the only industry. Logistics and distribution, there's big money in that, and the Queen knew it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last topic that I wanted to discuss, and I want to finish up here, was the visual elements of the show. I felt that the show worked better in night or low-level settings because, again, and I don't want to discredit the show, guys. I don't want to make it seem like I didn't enjoy it, because I did enjoy the show. But it's falling into the trap of every current modern historical piece that falls in the 1800s has to look like a grittier version of Pirates of the Caribbean or a grittier version of Downton Abbey, where there's, pigs, in the mud, and there's some guy like, chopping, intestines on the side of a urinal that a guy's peeing in. Like, does everything have to look so gross and disgusting and Jack Ripperish for us to believe that this is a historical piece happening in 1814?
Okay, if you're using Pirates of the Caribbean as your historical reference for how a time period should be demonstrated on screen, you're off base right there.
Are you telling me there's no undead pirates that's going to sell into Barbados?
The only difference now, you're saying that you have to get grittier and grittier. It was a dirty, filthy time. It was dark.
How do you know? Were you there?
Have you not read any history books? Do you think the plague spread through Europe because everyone had clean cobblestone streets and they had sanitation?
That was like the 1400s.
This is fairly accurate.
Yeah, essentially, what you have to look at is I would say that the tendency in showing grit and grime and slop and whatever, this is the Industrial Revolution. You're going from an agrarian society. You're putting people into towns together, and they have no idea about sanitation. They have no idea about how to do it. So all these people doing these activities when they're spread out over the countryside is no big deal, but you move them into one town together. I mean, I don't know if you know the history of Chicago, but the Chicago River, everything along the river was chemical plants, meat processing, and they would just dump all the waste straight in the river. So they actually built buildings with no windows facing the river. If you can imagine that, a city building along its principal waterway, no windows or doors facing it because it was so disgusting. I mean, that's the time you're living in, and I think it's actually refreshing to see that this shows start to do that. When we watched Tombstone for Shat the movies, these people are all clean, the town's clean, nobody's clothes are dirty. It was a disgusting time. Look at Deadwood. Deadwood is a great example of how gross stuff was.
To me, I was engrossed in the environment. I felt it. When he goes into the house and it's all candlelit, I found myself asking questions that I hadn't earlier, because a lot of motion pictures and traditional TV, they don't show you the inconvenience of living in a house by candlelight, that you have to have rooms pre-lit and carrying it around, and the sanitation like you had mentioned. As far as acting goes, I want to shift towards a little Tom Hardy. I always find that when I'm watching a movie, and as the movie goes on, if I forget, for example, in the Dallas Buyers Club, about 20 minutes in, I forgot it was Matthew McConaughey. It was the character. About 20 minutes into this, I stopped thinking of Tom Hardy, and I was thinking of James. So I think that is a testament to his portrayal of the character and the environment in London of the 1800s that was totally engrossing for me.
I love James's character. I love Tom Hardy as an actor, but Big D, I have to respectfully disagree. This is Tom Hardy being Tom Hardy. And I almost felt the character was written after him as a person. He since Bronson, he's been doing the grunting thing, the madman thing, and Mad Max. I mean, he does it very well. Don't get me wrong, but I kept thinking this is the Tom Hardy show. I mean, they could have literally called the show the Tom Hardy Show.
When we were describing the characteristics of James Delaney, the slave, sinking ship burning, bear wrestling, what does that remind you of? It reminds you of Dark Knight Returns, The Revenant. Like, they're just describing other characters that Tom Hardy has already played. Listen, I just want, what would surprise me? If by episode 4, Tom Hardy comes out and does some light tap shoe dancing and some singing, because I haven't seen Tom Hardy say, so that would probably do a little bit of disbelief for me, and maybe get engrossed in the character. Because you're right, I agree. I'm on the side of Gene here. I think that this is the Tom Hardy show, and I'm gonna have to watch it with subtitles on just like every other Tom Hardy movie.
Yeah, before I'm misunderstood, though, I want to make very clear that I relish this. Like, I love Tom Hardy being Tom Hardy. It's like if you say, like Steve Buscemi in Boardwalk Empire. He's very clearly Steve Buscemi in that show, right? Like, but it's enjoyable. Like, you like it. You pick it's perfect casting, which makes sense because he's involved in the production of the show.
All right. So that concludes all of our topics that we wanted to discuss for episode 1 of Taboo. Thoughts, predictions, ideas for this show, guys? How do you think it's going to stand up?
Well, just a quick thought. They released 3 episodes to critics, and a majority, it was 90%, that said the 3 episodes that they had seen were compelling, and the story gets even more engrossing as you go. So that was the same thing said for Westworld. I was happy with that. I think it's going to turn out to be, in the end, 8 episodes. We're going to wish we had more.
One of the interesting things that occurred to me today when I was thinking about the show is that the show relies much more heavily on well-written dialogue than a lot of things I've seen in a while. There aren't a lot of scene changes. Like, if you notice, I take my notes by scene, and there are very few scenes actually in the show. You might get cuts away to certain things, but it doesn't move a lot. There's long, prolonged scenes between 2 people or 4 people in a room. And I was so satisfied and so impressed with the writing that when James is on his way to go speak to the East India Company, I was salivating, man. I was like, oh boy, here we go. This is going to be good. This showdown. And it really didn't disappoint. The interaction between, I think, all 5 men in that room, there was subtlety, there was nuance, there was aggression, there was civility, there was trickery. Like, everything was going on at once, and it was something that reminded me a lot of like mob movies, where you could just really watch that scene over and over again, and it's just so well done. Especially that weird eye contact between James and the scribe guy. Like, I don't know what that was all about, but I watched that over and over again, going, what's going on here?
Yeah, often silence in a scene and letting a scene breathe speaks much louder than the written word. So I love that unspoken tension where you had all powerful men jockeying for position and feeling each other out. I'm excited to see what comes.
Yeah, ultimately for me, guys, I'm not quite as excited as I was for Westworld, but hopefully I'll change my mind maybe over the next, once they start unraveling some of the mystery and we dive into the story, hopefully it'll be good because it has at least a good solid foundation for me. So we'll see. Unless there's anything else, guys, that'll conclude this week's episode of Shat on TV Taboo. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're everywhere fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, YouTube. Please subscribe, leave a review. 5 stars really helps us out. And be sure to share that on your social media pages. We're everywhere on social media, including Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram. Follow us at Shat on TV. Just search for our Facebook page as well, Shat on TV. Our website is shatontv.com. Be sure to leave an email for us. Give us your thoughts and reactions throughout the season, your predictions, and we will read them on the show and give you a shout out. You can find us at hosts at shatontv.com. Gene?
Yeah, guys, and we got so much help from the listeners on Westworld. It was more than we could have ever done by ourselves. That crowd sourcing to get the information together, get the theories together, crack stuff. Again, 1,000 brains are better than 3, so please help us out, especially ladies. Give us some female viewpoints. We can always use those. So yeah, we really encourage you, hosts at shatontv.com, to hit us with those ideas so we can kind of help us help you.
One of my favorite things that we did on the Westworld podcast was the Telegraph, which was our fan-driven and focused episode of the week where we would do nothing but read the top emails and respond to them. So if we could get that going for this podcast, that would be great. So again, that email is hosts at Shat on TV. You can also check out our store on the website for cool Shat on TV merchandise that helps keep the lights on. We might even do something for Taboo. Might need your help from the audience. But until next week, guys, I am Roger Roper on behalf of Gene Lyons and Big D. Be sure to join us every Tuesday immediately after the American airing of Taboo for our show each week. And then if we get enough fan mail, maybe we'll do a Taboo Telegraph or a Tales from the Bottles is what we'll call it. Anyway.
No, I don't. What would be the method of communication?
The fire. You're talking to the fire. Shouting at the Thames. River rants.
River rants.
River rants. I like it.
I like message in a bottle. I like messages in a bottle. All right. Thanks, guys, for joining us for Taboo FX. We'll see you next Tuesday. Take care.